Should have the mute button on there. Sarah. On. No.
Good evening. I'll call this special board meeting on the budget to order. First item on the agenda is a review of the budget recap and timeline from Mr. Guidry.
Okay, we have tonight's meeting where we'll be discussing all non-general fund budgets with the exception of the group insurance fund, which we'll discuss at the same time as the general fund, which that discussion will take place at our next meeting, March 26th. Besides that, there have been no changes to the calendar since the last time it's been submitted, so I'd ask if there are any questions from board members.
Item number 2, proposed budget for the 2019-2020 Special Revenue Fund.
With regards to the special revenue funds, I would like to note that there's been one change due to a new GASB 84, which basically will require that we start budgeting for school activity funds within the special revenue fund. So that's the main difference in this proposed budget, is we're now including school activity funds. So it's more of just a reporting requirement and nothing else. Before that, we were reporting it in another section that didn't require a budget. That's the main change. I asked if there are any questions with regards to that proposed budget.
Item number 3 is the proposed budget for the 2019-2020 Capital Projects Capital Improvement Fund.
The capital improvement fund reflects the standard $2.5 million of revenues from sales tax for the current year. It also reflects, we typically try to set aside a similar amount for the succeeding year, 2021 in this case, which we've set aside $2.6 million in this proposed budget. So we've accomplished both of the standards that we target, and beyond that, the projects reflect the capital requests that were submitted during the budget process, and as well as carry forward projects that are starting in fiscal year 19 and carrying over to 20. At this time, I'd ask if there are any questions with regards to this proposed budget.
And I apologize to the audience. In my haste, I neglected to ask, are there any public comments on either the budget recap and timeline or the special revenue fund? If you do have any comments or questions about either of those two items that we reviewed, please come to the podium and ask them now. Are there any public comments on the 2019-2020 Capital Projects Capital Improvement Fund? Any board member questions? Item number 4, the proposed budget for 2019-2020 Self-Funded Construction Fund.
The self-funded construction fund, very similar in terms of what our goals are, and that is to provide for $2.5 million from sales tax revenues in the current year, as well as the $2.5 million reserve for 2021, the succeeding year. And we've accomplished both in this case. I'd ask if there are any questions or comments.
I do have a question about the matching fund line item in this budget, Mr. Guidry. How much of the $500,000 did we spend the last year on matching fund projects?
I'm going by memory. I'm going to estimate, but it was probably in the $200,000 range that we spent and had to restore to bring it back up to 500.
Do we have any idea, ballpark number, how many schools, distinct schools, campuses benefited from these projects?
I think it was similar to the year before, about 3 or 4 schools for the most part, as far as the larger projects.
Okay, thank you very much. Number 5 is the proposed budget for the 2016 Construction Fund.
The 2016 construction fund basically just reflects the bond proceeds and the projects that are included on the bond project listing for that particular bond sale. So the expenditures reflect those projects, the amount that's carrying forward from the projected amount that's carrying forward from fiscal year 19. These are all, for the most part, carryover projects. I'd ask if there are any questions at this point in time.
Might I ask why the $25,000 for Southside High School is in this fund and not the Southside High School construction fund that we're going to review in a minute?
We, with regards to funding sources, we had set aside some funding for consumables and this pending move of portables. And so there are some funds set aside outside of the Southside Construction Fund to accomplish that.
Okay. Are there any questions from the public on the 2016 construction fund? Number 7, the 2019-2020 Southside High School construction fund.
That basically reflects the budgeted funds that remain and will be used to move the portables and set them up at Southside for next school year. And ask if there are any questions or comments with regards to this budget.
Do we have any comment from the public on this particular budget? Number 8, the 1920 debt service fund.
The debt service fund reflects one major change from last year, and that's basically the debt service payments that are starting up on the USDA borrowing. For the most part, the other amounts reflected on the schedules are not significantly different from prior year. So we're starting to see the debt drop off as we had originally projected on some of the projects that were done in the 1990s. We're using some of that to provide debt service for the new debt, as well as a transfer from the general fund for the USDA borrowing, and the budget proposed budget is reflecting that. I'd ask if there are any questions or comments with regards to the proposed debt service fund.
Is there any public comment on the proposed debt service fund budget? Number 9, the 1920 combined sales tax fund.
The combined sales tax fund reflects a 2% increase over what we're projecting to finish this year at. So our projection for the current year takes us through January, the actual collections through January, and then the amounts that we had budgeted for February through June, we increased by 2%. And that became our base to increase by 2% for next year. So the budget reflects a 2% increase over the projected collections for the current year, and it also reflects a slight increase in transfers to the debt service fund to cover the new debt service that's required in terms of the sales tax revenue bonds that we've just recently sold. And that's pretty much the budget assumption for revenues and the main change on the expenditure side from the current year. I'd ask if there are any questions or comments with regards to the sales tax fund.
Is there any public comment on the, I had to scroll up to remember which one we were on, the combined sales tax fund? Mr. Guidry, you must be doing a phenomenal job of explaining this. Number 10, the 1920 School Food Service Fund.
The school food service fund, not a significant difference there other than with regards to the MFP, the funds that are transferred from general fund into or to the child nutrition fund. In the current year, we reduced the amount of the transfer to school food service from the general fund because we did not need as much funding to balance that budget, mainly due to the CEP program, where federal reimbursement is based on, it's 100% for the school. Everyone at those qualified schools eat for free. That has increased our revenue base and decreased the need for the general fund to supplement at the level it was previously supplementing. So what we've done last year and again this year for 1920 is the reduction. Last year, the full reduction was sent to capital projects to fund replacement of cold storage. I don't know if you're familiar with the two, we refer to them as Quonset hut, that's being used for cold storage. We're looking at replacing both of them on the same site or same base foundation where they're currently located.
Is this the location off of Cameron Street?
Correct.
Okay.
And so last year's reduction in the amount that we transferred to child nutrition and redirected to capital, and what we're proposing in the 1920 budget, that reduction would fund the entire replacement. So in essence, funding that was previously going to child nutrition is going to child nutrition, but for capital projects. And that's the main difference here from previous years. I ask if there are any questions or comments with regards to the school food service fund.
Is there any public comment on the proposed school food service budget for fiscal year 1920? Okay, and our final agenda item for the night is the proposed budget for the 1920-2002 half-cent sales tax fund.
No changes there. The budget assumption is the same as used for the combined sales tax fund, and that is a 2% increase. Besides that, the expenditures reflect the categories that have been reflected in previous years. No significant changes there, with exception of in-service days. We're looking at funding 2 optional in-service days. That number fluctuates from year to year, just depending on the school calendar. Some years, the 2002 tax funds 2. Some years they fund 1. It just depends on the calendar. For fiscal year 2020, they would be funding 2. So at this point, I would ask if there are any questions or comments with regards to the 2002 1/2 cent sales tax fund.
Is there any public comment on the proposed budget for the 2002 half-cent sales tax fund? Well, hearing none, I'll remind everyone that as we progress through the budget cycle and have additional meetings, you will have additional opportunities to not comment at these meetings as you see fit. So perhaps go home and sleep on this and read these budgets again. And when you do come up with your questions, feel free to email any one of us or Mr. Guidry or Mr. Dugas. They'll be happy to answer your questions. Or come back to the next meeting on March 26th and ask them then. So with that said, that's the last item on the agenda. We'll take looks like a 12-minute break, and then we'll get started with the second meeting.
Hey, that's funny.